The cell bars are 6 solid steel rods encased in more steel. Guards patrol the corridor and keep watch from gun galleries and watchtowers. Leaving the cell house for the relative freedom of the exercise yard is considered a privilege. Working, showering, eating, living is done under watchful eyes. Alcatraz is an island, and her most effective walls are the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay. But in 1962, none of that will keep 3 prisoners from attempting the impossible, an escape from Alcatraz. Come with me as we follow in their footsteps, locked up in the prison known as the Rock. San Francisco is a beautiful, vibrant place, a city packed to the rim with things to do, places to see, people to meet. Today's visitors can find all 3 at once at the docks, where boats leave crammed with sightseers eager to catch a glimpse at one of the most feared, mysterious, haunted places in America. Spanish explorers, on seeing the island in the middle of the bay covered in nesting pelicans, named the place for the birds and called it Alcatraz. When Frank Morris and the brothers John and Clarence Anglin arrived in 1962, the Rock had been used as a prison for almost a century. As prisoners set out from the dock under heavy guard, Alcatraz's suitability for this purpose would have been immediately evident. For 15 minutes, they would have plowed through the chilly waters of the bay, waters that stood between any escapee and freedom. They would have noticed that the closest landfall, Angel Island, was about a mile from the prison, a mile through 50-degree waters driven by strong currents. And then they would have shifted their eyes to the Rock itself. It looks like the silhouette of an old, rusting battleship sitting in the choppy waters. Lonely, guarded, dangerous. The prisoners would have landed here, at the dock, the one way in to the Rock, and been welcomed by this sign. The graffiti wasn't present in 1962. It's a remnant and a reminder of an interesting moment in this island's history that came after it closed as a federal prison. In the late 60s and into the early 70s, groups of Native Americans occupied the island, claiming it as Indian land and drawing attention to the plight of their tribes. The island bears several reminders of this occupation, which ended in tragedy when the daughter of one of the native leaders fell to her death from the upper floor of this building next to the docks. Prisoners like Morris and the Anglin brothers would have seen this building but might not have known its history. They were looking at a structure which had been built for warfare, not incarceration. The U.S. Army had built fortifications on Alcatraz during the Civil War era, and this building is a remnant of those fortifications. The red brick peeking out from under whitewash is a clue, as is this date chiseled into the entryway. These windows weren't meant to be windows, but cannon emplacements commanding the bay. Later, when the Army lost interest in Alcatraz as a military fort and repurposed it as a prison, 2 floors were added to this building to house guards and their families. The ground floor, however, retains its 19th century military flavor regardless of repurposing. It's a place meant to survive shelling, combat. Morris and the Anglin brothers probably didn't notice, even as they were led through the sally port, another surviving military structure that straddles the only road leading up to the prison. Here, during the Army years, cannon would have been placed to fire grape shot, hundreds of pieces of metal shrapnel, at any force that dared to assault the Rock's fortifications. To go along with the fortifications, the Army built the first lighthouse in the bay on the island, a lighthouse replaced over time and made larger, spreading a light of warning to ships as far as 12 miles out to sea. Finally, the twisting road would have led the prisoners past buildings where guards and their families congregated and towards the cell house at the top of the island. Built to replace the Army's citadel, this was the maximum security prison that was created to house the nation's most dangerous felons, the ones who had proved too dangerous to keep anywhere else, the ones who had a habit of attempting escape. They would have been led into the prison and shocked by the bright pink paint of the main corridor of the cell block, known as Broadway. They would have been shown into a cell, Lying on the cot would have been a copy of the prison rules. Everything they would have needed to know about their time on the rock would be found in rule number 5. You are entitled to food, clothing, shelter, and medical attention. Anything else that you get is a privilege. One of those privileges was being allowed into the exercise yard. For a moment, Morris and his friends could glimpse everything they had lost, the freedom of San Francisco Bay. But then they descended into the well of the yard, and the view became nothing but concrete and cons. A pin opened to the sky, but a pin nevertheless. Meals were eaten here, with guards patrolling with machine guns outside the windows. Early on in the history of Alcatraz, the rule here, and everywhere, was complete silence. By the time Frank Morris sat here planning his escape with the Anglin brothers, that rule had been rescinded. But inmates still ate only with spoons, and above their heads waited canisters of tear gas. Break the rules of society, and you wind up in prison. Break the rules of prison, and they send you to Alcatraz. Break the rules of Alcatraz, and you wind up on D Block. The isolation wing was the hardest time you could do on Alcatraz, and the hardest time of all was done here, on this row of solitary cells. Here, the misbehaving inmate could be locked away in near total darkness, in a bare cell, with nothing but thoughts for company. One night in 1946, a prisoner sweeping the floor of the cell block known as CD Street managed to climb up to the gun gallery while the guard patrolled D Block, his back turned. He used a homemade tool to spread the bars. He had starved himself for weeks in order to be able to slip between the resulting gap. He beat the guard and took his weapon. Releasing several other violent prisoners and taking hostage several other guards, it seemed the plan was working. As time stretched on, the break was discovered. The prisoners opened fire on the hostages in the cells, killing several. Then they settled in for a siege. Days later, as troops dropped grenades on their heads from holes blasted in the roof, the prisoners were driven into a utility corridor, where they were finally found, dead from wounds. The Battle of Alcatraz was over. The unsuccessful inmates finally left the cell block and were taken here. The morgue, a tiny building built over the end of a Civil War-era tunnel. Their last cell. Frank Morris wanted no part of a loud, showy, unsuccessful prison break. And so it began. Using tools cobbled together from stolen kitchenware, he and the Anglin brothers started chipping away at the concrete surrounding the grill under the sinks in their cells. They made papier-mâché replacements to put in the wall to hide the digging, and fake heads to put in their cots to fool the guards. On the other side of the wall was a utility corridor, which they used to climb to the top of the cell block, a private place where they made life jackets and a raft from rain jackets. They slipped up a ventilation shaft to the roof, climbed down, and then to the beach, and disappeared, headed for Angel Island. No one has seen them since. Today, the Rock is one of the most popular tourist attractions in the nation, the site and setting of popular action films and beach-reading novels. It's not hard to tour the island. It's smaller than you might expect, and once there, you can stay all day if you choose, so long as you catch the last boat out. You can poke around the cell block and the buildings where prison industries were housed. You can follow in the footsteps of some of the most dangerous men in American history. Men who would have given anything to be able to do what you do at the end of the day. Escape the Rock.